Welcome to Seasons of Grace, your daily dose of inspiration. As we journey through the Great Fast, we'll be reading selections from Father Jack Custer's book, Back to the Garden, a Lenten Journey Through Genesis.
Friday of the second week of the Great Fast. We read from the book of Genesis, chapter 5, verse 32, through chapter 6, verse 8. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repents me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You cannot see monuments like Stonehenge in England, or the huge stone heads on Easter Island, without marveling that people erected such things with only the most basic tools. 3,000 years ago, people readily attributed such feats to giants, heroes, superhuman figures from a golden age vastly superior to the present. In speaking human language and expressing himself in human literature, the Word of God sometimes uses such commonly held ideas to make a deeper point that remains true even if the folklore behind it is clearly imaginary. Yesterday we watched human lifespans grow shorter and shorter. The story of the Nephilim, Hebrew for the fallen, is another way of saying that humans were once greater than we are now. But everything else we have read in Genesis clarifies that it is in terms of our likeness to God that we have shrunk, and that the symptoms are as much spiritual as physical. The story of the Nephilim marks the last straw in the saga of sin that began in Eden. From the very first, sin has been equated with selfishness, with the attempt to be our own gods so that we don't need God. God had already created man as both physical and spiritual when he breathed his own breath of life into the man fashioned out of clay and made Adam a living soul. The monstrous mating of heavenly beings with humanly women portrays a crude attempt for creatures to do for themselves what God had already done. Of course, bodiless angels cannot mate with humans. The folktale points to a deeply rooted fantasy. What if we could acquire heavenly power for ourselves in a pleasurable way and make ourselves superhuman? That temptation expresses itself in all sorts of ways in every generation. The same folktale also teaches another spiritual truth. From centaurs to mermaids, mythology abounds with imaginary creatures that are half one thing and half another. Human beings really are both body and soul, both spiritual and material. Only by self-discipline and moderation can we learn to strike the proper balance in caring for both body and soul. Otherwise, the spirit will always risk being dragged down by physical passions and appetites left untended and uncontrolled, or we will pretend to live a purely spiritual life that is, in fact, beyond our abilities. In a sense, it is only now that God chooses to execute the sentence of death he pronounced on Adam and Eve 10 generations earlier. The human lifespan will be strictly limited. It is not that the turn of events on earth has taken God by surprise, and it is not that he has changed his mind about creation. This style of storytelling, which we find elsewhere in Genesis, is meant to impress on us the immensity and tragedy of human sin. It did not have to be this way. And in fact, God's sentence of death is not his last word. The divine spirit, or breath, that gives life to our bodies is our immortal soul. The Old Testament shows a gradual understanding of what happens to that soul after death, what the Bible calls Sheol or Hades, but also reveals a growing hope that body and soul would, in fact, be reunited. The resurrection of the body is a difficult concept to accept, and indeed, many religions and philosophies throughout history have preferred to imagine that human beings survive only in spirit. We are reminded today, even as we fast, how profoundly Christian faith respects the human body and the material creation as a whole. And we are also reminded that only the resurrection of Christ makes our own resurrection possible. Today, for the first time, we see the goal of the resurrection at the end of the Lenten journey. Or reflection. Where do you feel the tension between the spiritual and physical in your own life? Are you taking proper care of your body, your material possessions, and your resources? Are you tempted to pretend that material things don't matter and concentrate on purely spiritual practices, feelings, or thoughts in your relationship with God? How well do you practice the virtue of moderation in food, drink, entertainment, and pleasures? How are you using this fast to grow in those virtues? What are the physical or material temptations most likely to drag you down? How can you use the fast to gain more self-discipline over them?
Thank you for listening to Seasons of Grace. If you would like to send this episode to a friend or listen again, please visit godwithusradio.org. You can also find previous and future episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and almost everywhere podcasts are available. A special thank you to Eastern Christian Publications for their permission to present Back to the Garden in this format.